Let's take a trip back to 1866, when Oklahoma was known as Indian Territory and not yet a state. The Civil War had just ended, and many Native American tribes faced repercussions for siding with the Confederacy. Reconstruction treaties established by the U.S. government redrew the lines of ownership in the Midwest, opening up unassigned lands that homesteaders were eager to settle. One other concession in the Reconstruction Treaty allowed railroad companies to lay tracks across Indian lands. On July 4th of 1884, Congress granted a construction contract allowing the Southern Kansas Railway Company to lay a railroad line from Kansas right through the unassigned lands of Indian Territory. As a result, many towns sprouted along the tracks, towns that still thrive today. This is the story of Edmond, one small establishment planted in the middle of Oklahoma Territory to support passing trains. Like other cities in Oklahoma, Edmond grew overnight after the land run of 1889. In the following years, this city weathered dust storms, world wars, even a Great Depression, all impactful experiences that shaped the city into what it is today. If you ever wondered why there are train tracks going through the middle of town, there's a reason for that. If you ever asked why Edmond was named Edmond, there's an explanation for that too. To truly understand and appreciate what influences a town or city, one must be willing to discover its roots. In the spring of 1887, 15 surveyors left Arkansas City, Kansas, laying out a new route to Gainesville, Texas, and marking potential sites for coal and water stations. In the area now known as downtown Edmond, the surveyors documented their first observations of the town, noting that it had a good spring. The area was first named Mile Marker 103, indicating the number of miles from Arkansas City. Expansion of the railroad system soon followed, with hard-working crews building tracks at a rate of 1.5 miles a day. Mile Marker 103 took on the name Edmond. Santa Fe Railway named it after one of their officials, Edmund Schuler Burdick. The first priority for Edmond Station was the construction of a water well and coaling station so that passing locomotives could fill their tanks and fuel their engines. In the 19th century, steam engines without tenders had to stop every 10 miles to refill their water supply and to keep their boilers replenished. The first family to call Mile Marker 103 their home was the Steen family. John Steen was an experienced Santa Fe railroad worker, employed as an engineer, fireman, conductor, and brakeman before coming to Edmond. Steen was brought in from New Mexico in the winter of 1886 to complete the massive water well alongside the railroad tracks. Under his supervision, road crews hand-dug the well with picks and shovels to an eventual depth of 130 feet. The well was 24 feet across and lined with 2 feet of rock to prevent the walls from collapsing. The well was then covered with a conical roof to keep the water clean. Near the railroad track, a large water tank was built on stilts. Trains would stop and fill up their tenders using up to 3,600 gallons of water, along with 5 tons of coal for a 100-mile trip. Back then, a ton of coal was $1.88. Only one passenger and one freight train passed through each day. John Steen and Santa Fe crews also built a small red pump house that delivered water from the well to the water tank. The pump house also served as a home for John, his wife Cordelia, and their 2-year-old son, Charlie. In the wintertime, the boiler and pumps inside provided extra heat, keeping the family warm. In the summer, the Steens would set up cots and sleep outside. Cordelia Steen would often cook meals for hungry train crews. John would hunt deer from the front door of their pump house home. Sometimes Indians would visit and trade fresh meat for flour and coffee. The Steens spent their first Christmas at the pump house decorating the branch of a blackjack oak tree in the winter of 1888. This photograph depicts the first Christmas in Edmond's history. Charlie Steen received a rocking horse as his present that day. The Steen family was certainly isolated for the first few months at mile marker 103, but they would not be alone for much longer. In March of 1889, President Benjamin Harris signed the Indian Appropriations Bill, which opened nearly 2 million acres of unassigned land to white settlement in the center of Indian Territory. For those interested, 160 acres of land was free for those who staked a claim. Participants had to be 21 years old and an American citizen. Their only cost was a $14 filing fee. Owners of the land would be determined in an unconventional way called a land run, which required settlers to race to a plot of land and stake a claim. On the morning of April 22nd, somewhere between 50 to 60,000 settlers waited along all four borders of the unassigned lands. The night before, many impatient settlers had illegally crossed the border and hid in the woods, waiting to stake their claim. They would earn the name Sooners, while other participants would be known as the 1889ers. Edward and Elma Childers, along with their newborn son, Winifred, traveled from Kansas to take part in the first great rush for free government land. They would be one of Edmond's first residents. Elma would later tell her family in a letter about the experience.
It was a sight indeed. Everyone was so excited that they couldn't stand still. All of the men along the South Canadian River got as far in the river as they possibly could without sinking in the quicksand, and there waited for the hour of noon to come.
When the time was 12 o'clock, the sound of a cavalry bugle rose through the clear blue air. In Fort Reno, a cannon fired. The first Oklahoma land run was on.
Moved by the same impulse, each driver lashed his horses furiously. Each rider dug his spurs into his willing steed, and each man on foot caught his breath hard and darted forward. A cloud of dust rose where the home seekers had stood in line, and when it had drifted away before the gentle breeze, the horses and wagons and men were tearing across the open country like fiends. The horsemen had the best of it from the start. Some of the men who started from the line on foot were quite as successful in securing desirable claims as many who rode fleet horses. One man left the line with the others, carrying on his back a tent, a blanket, some camp dishes, an axe, and provisions for 2 days. He ran down the railway track for 6 miles and reached his claim in just 60 minutes. Upon arriving on his land, he fell down under a tree, unable to speak or see. I am glad to be able to say that his claim is one of the best in Oklahoma. William Willard Howard, Harper's Weekly, May 1889.
Traveling north out of Purcell, a double-engine train approached Edmond. On board, many eager passengers were waiting to stake their claim in Guthrie. But a female reporter for the Dallas Morning News was determined to claim a piece of land in Edmond, even though the train wasn't stopping. Her name was Nanita Daisy, later known as Kentucky Daisy. Legend has it that she persuaded the train's engineer to let her ride on the train's cowcatcher.
You see, I'd been in this territory a good deal, and I had a good claim picked out. It's about 20 miles south of Guthrie, just alongside the railroad. I got on the first train the day it was opened, got on the engine. Jiminy, but it was exciting. When I got in sight of my claim, I gave the engineer a signal. He began to slow up. Nearly everybody on the train had heard about me, and I tell you, there was excitement. I got all my things ready. I had my cloak, a revolver, and my 2 claim stakes with my name on them. When I got even with my claim, I gave a jump while the train was in motion. The engineer, did not dare stop the train still. I landed feet first, you can bet your life, while everybody in the cars yelled, "Hurrah for Nanita Daisy!" As the train went by, I planted my stakes, threw my cloak over one, then fell on my knees and discharged my revolver in the air, exclaiming, "Thus I salute the Kentucky Daisy's claim!" Nanita Daisy, May 7th, 1892.
and she ran back to the train just in time to catch the caboose. Her story was covered by every major newspaper in the nation. That morning, Edmond's only residents were John Steen, his family, and a few railroad workers. By nightfall, the population had grown to 150 people. From that day on, Edmond became a bustle of activity. Eager entrepreneurs established all sorts of businesses in the new town. There were banks, blacksmiths, and drugstores. There was even a livery stable where people could keep their horse, cleverly named Hotel de Haas. However, one key element was missing. During the summer of 1889, a petite yet bold woman named Jenny Forster marched into Brown's Lumber Company on a mission. She and her husband George operated a grocery store on Broad Street. Jenny recognized the need for education in the new town. Therefore, she ordered enough lumber on credit to build a much-needed schoolhouse for the town's children. Mrs. Forster was the president of the Ladies' Aid Society and the School Aid Society, which was comprised of 15 women. As town volunteers built the one-room schoolhouse, the women of the School Aid Society set to work paying back the lumber bill. They badgered their husbands and other town merchants. Mrs. Forster would later joke that Edmond businessmen felt like running out the back door when they saw her entering the front door. Women would make and sell rugs. They even held town fundraisers like an ice cream social that raised $25. Money earned would go to the construction of the schoolhouse and to pay a young teacher, Miss Ollie McCormick. Her salary was $30 a month for the 8-month school session. The schoolhouse certainly earned its keep in the community by hosting both local town meetings, church services, as well as Saturday night dances. On September 16th, the school opened with only 19 pupils, but by the end of the term, Miss McCormick had 37 students, ranging from 1st to 8th grade. During the second year, a bell was added, along with 2 vestibules at each entry. As more and more students enrolled into the school board built a substantial addition to the rear of the building. 2 teachers were now necessary, one to teach the primary students, while another taught the upper classes. In 1900, East Side School opened 2 blocks away. Edmond children now had a 2-story stone building from which to learn. The 2-room schoolhouse was then sold and converted into a home. Today, the original building still stands along Route 66 and has been completely renovated to match its original appearance as a territorial schoolhouse. The building is open to the public and still used to teach children about history and the lives of early pioneers. In December 1890, while Miss Ollie McCormick was teaching her second year in the one-room schoolhouse, the Oklahoma Territory Legislature met to decide the establishment of several institutions throughout Oklahoma Territory. Residents were eager to ensure that one of those institutions be located in Edmond. Dr. J.W. Howard presented Council Bill 106, which called for the Territorial Normal School of Oklahoma to be granted to the town of Edmond. A normal school was an institution dedicated to training public teachers. After heated debates, the legislature passed the bill provided that certain conditions be met. Oklahoma County had to donate $5,000 in bonds. 40 acres of land within a mile of Edmond proper had to be donated for the school and to help raise funds. Anton Klassen, a lawyer from Illinois who had participated in the land run, donated 40 acres for the campus on the east edge of town. 10 acres were reserved for the college itself. The other 30 acres were divided into lots and sold to raise money for the new school. The first teacher and principal of the normal school was Richard Thatcher, a man with an interesting past. At the age of 15, he joined the Union Army and was a drummer boy during the Civil War. He was captured by Confederates and placed in Andersonville Prison, where he contracted tuberculosis and nearly died. Managing to escape, he rejoined his unit and served until his discharge. After the war, Richard earned degrees in English and science and a doctorate in divinity. He served as a superintendent of schools in Kansas and then worked briefly in Washington, D.C. as a clerk for the Census Bureau. He was elected principal of the Territorial Normal School in 1891 and would be an important figure at the college until his death in 1909. The Normal Building, now known as Old North, was first constructed as a 3-story building with a basement. The 2 wings and main clock tower were added a couple of years later. Since the building would not be ready for its first term, Mr. Thatcher arranged for classes to begin at the First Methodist Church, using desks he built himself. His first class began November 9, 1891. Students were admitted free if they declared their intentions to teach school in Oklahoma Territory. Otherwise, the tuition was $7.50 per term for 22 weeks. In 1894, the wings and tower of Old North were completed. The new school building proudly stood within the growing community. The Edmond Sun said the school was the gem of Oklahoma, a magnificent structure equipped with modern improvements. To help the teachers in their training, Thatcher established a model school with 12 children that the college students could instruct and get practical teacher experience. The first graduating class in the normal school consisted of 3 ladies and 2 men. Over the years, the Territorial Normal School of Oklahoma changed names 6 times, finally settling on the University of Central Oklahoma in 1991. Today, the 4-year college has an enrollment of approximately 17,000 on its 210-acre campus. UCO was named an official U.S. Olympic and Paralympic training site and hosted the 2010 World Sitting Volleyball Championships on its campus. From its very beginning, education has always been an important benefit to Edmond, as well as an overwhelming sense of family, community, and an affinity to always help others, especially in periods of need. We've seen this time and time again throughout Oklahoma's rich history.
Be quiet. Come on, Betsy. We haven't got all night.
It was Halloween night, somewhere around the year 1913, on the campus of Central State Normal School in Edmond. A few pranksters and a cow were climbing the winding staircase of Old North. One of the boys involved was a former student named Earl Rodkey. He had recently dropped out of the college with plans to go into business with his father. As the cow reluctantly climbed the staircase, Earl became worried about the prank and decided to leave before he was caught. Now, either the cow was mooing a lot, or the tremendous commotion caused the bell in Old North to ring. Perhaps it was both. 3 blocks away, police officers hurried to Old North to investigate. The students were caught and expelled, while the cow was safely lowered down the outside of the tower with ropes. Earl Rodkey had barely escaped in time. He would tell his children and grandchildren all about his many escapades and pranks, like the time he and his friend tipped over the outhouse of Mr. Aaron Fretz while the old Civil War veteran was still inside. That's the same Mr. Fretz that the Edmond Street is named after. Life was open record in a small town. Everybody knew everybody. When Earl was 9 and fell from a rock, breaking his arm, it made the paper. When his younger brother, Donald, plummeted from a tree at age 12 and broke his leg, it made the paper too. Though the boys could be ornery at some times, the Rodkey family had a significant impact on many local families and the town of Edmond as a whole. Isaac and Catherine Rodkey lived in town with their 3 children, Bess, Earl, and Donald. Isaac was the owner of the Rodkey Flour Mill. His goal was to produce the highest quality flour and cereal products. Flour from the mill had even won several national awards. Isaac's great-grandson, Ken Reese, still lives in Edmond today. He remembers visiting the mill as a child.
I would describe it as a triumph of 19th century engineering and technology. It was dusty and noisy, but an exciting place to visit. You know, it had its own power generation because when it was established, there was no electricity in Edmond. And I remember seeing that generator, which was sparking and noisy, and it was a pretty scary place. Then the mill itself, with belts running all over the place, and the man lift that would take people all the way to the fourth floor, and you had to jump off before you went over the top. It was a pretty spectacular thing for a child to see.
During the First World War and the Great Depression, when many Americans were struggling, the Rodkey Flour Mill had a lot of success. More families were baking their own bread at the time, and the demand for flour was high. Unemployment was high, but the busy mill remained the city's largest employer, with around 30 workers on the payroll. The Rodkeys would also help local farmers by purchasing their grain crop each season. To further comfort families, the company would also create dual-purpose flour sacks printed with fashionable patterns. Housewives would use the colorful material to make clothing for the family. The Rodkey Company motto was, "Buy the flour, use the sack. If not satisfied, get your money back." Sacks would also be designed to make aprons, pillowcases, and even dolls for children.
I understand it was my Uncle Don Rodkey who came up with the idea, perhaps heard of it somewhere, of printing doll patterns on the sacks. And then they could be cut out and stuffed and sewn into dolls for the children. And there were probably 8 or 10 versions of this doll, which it says on her back there, Rodkey's Rag Darling was her name. And apparently these are collector's items these days.
The Rodkey family was also very generous in giving back to the community. Isaac had helped to fund the construction of the First Methodist Church, where he was an active member. He even donated money to the construction of other churches in town. He served on the school board and was also on the city council, where the first streets in Edmond were paved. If that wasn't enough, he also served as a director of Home State Life Insurance Company and was on the board of the First National Bank of Edmond. His wife, Catherine, was also an active member of Edmond's social and cultural life. The parties she would host often made it into the local newspaper. She was known for her fine needlework and for being an avid gardener. She was a founder of the City Federation of Women's Club, which raised funds to landscape Mitch Park, which was originally located in downtown Edmond, where the current post office now sits. Isaac and Catherine's home was across the street from Mitch Park on Campbell Street. The home was built in 1900 and remained in the family for 80 years. Their youngest son, Donald, bought the home from them in the late 20s and lived there until his death in 1980. After surviving several different owners, the Rodkey home was in danger of being torn down. In 2007, plans were in the works to build an office building at its location. In the interest of preserving its history, the home's owner gifted it to the city of Edmond. The city, the Edmond Historic Preservation Trust, and several generous donors invested in moving the home 6 blocks down to Stevenson's Park, the oldest existing park in Edmond today. There are plans to renovate the house to be used for all types of functions that Catherine Rodkey would have welcomed in her home. For Catherine, home meant everything. Before her death in 1940, Catherine wrote about how valuable a home can truly be.
Home, what a hallowed name. How full of enchantment and how dear to the heart. A home is physically a place to live in, socially a place to have fun in, and intellectually and morally a place to improve in. Otherwise, it might as well move off the street. Home is the chief school of human virtue. Its responsibilities, joys, sorrows, smiles, tears hopes from the chief interest of human life. Home is a place of rest, refuge. Home is the spot where the child pours out all its complaints, and it is the grave of all its sorrows. Childhood has its sorrows and its grievances, but home is the place where these are soothed and banished by the sweet lullaby of a fond mother's voice. Make home happy to them when they are young. Send them out into the world in the full belief that there is no place like home, aye, be it ever so humble. And even if the old home should, in the course of time, be pulled down or be lost to your children, it will live in their memories. The kind looks and kind words and thoughtful love of those who once inhabited it will not pass away. Home, let thrones rot and empires wither. Home, let the world die in earthquake struggles and be buried amid procession of planets and dirge of spheres. Home, let everlasting ages roll in irresistible sweep. Home, no sorrow, no crying, no tears, no death, but home, sweet home, beautiful home, glorious home, everlasting home, home with each other, home with angels, home with God, home, home.
From its small beginnings as a watering hole for trains, Edmond and cities like it in Oklahoma continue to grow. For the past 120 years, freight has moved down these same railroad tracks while the landscape along them changed significantly. What was once a vast prairie of buffalo wallows, wagon roads, and a few wooden buildings has become a lively community with paved 4-lane roads and vital services. However, for people who were born here, raised here, moved here, and even died here, its most worthy role has simply been home.